I woke up that morning to the smell of coffee drifting through the house, the kind that hits your nose just right. Bitter, warm, familiar. The sun had barely risen, but the kitchen was already alive with noise. The hum of the fridge, the clatter of dishes, and, of course, my family moving around. Excited for the trip ahead, I watched my daughter pour cream into her cup, her laugh bouncing off the walls as my son-in-law rolled his eyes at something she said. It was all so ordinary, so deceptively ordinary. Packing was already in full swing. I noticed the careful way my grandpa folded his clothes, slow but precise, like he'd done this exact routine 100 times before. He seemed quieter than usual, more reserved, and I couldn't help but feel a little tug of worry in my chest. Something about the way he paused by the doorway, hands resting on the frame, made me think he knew something we didn't. I poured myself a cup of coffee and stirred it absent-mindedly, watching the steam curl up toward the ceiling. I let my mind wander back to past family trips, those mornings when everything felt lighter, laughter spilling over pancakes and toast, the smell of pine trees waiting outside, the promise of road trips ahead. I could still see my grandpa leaning on his cane at the cabin door, a crooked smile on his face, his eyes crinkling like he'd just shared the world's best joke. And yet, this morning felt different. My son-in-law's impatience had been growing, in subtle ways over the past few weeks. Little sighs, abrupt movements, a tone that wasn't quite right. I tried to ignore it, told myself I was reading too much into it. But deep down, there was that small, insistent flicker of unease, a whisper telling me not everything was as perfect as it seemed. I glanced out the window as the first rays of sun filtered through the car windshields in the driveway. The light was beautiful, almost peaceful. I wanted to believe that this trip would be like all the others, full of harmless teasing, little arguments that faded into laughter, and the comforting chaos of family. I thought today would be like the others. I caught myself thinking, my voice quiet, almost a whisper to no one in particular. Full of laughter, harmless teasing. I thought I knew what family meant. There was a calm to the morning, yes, but beneath it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Tiny cracks in the usual harmony. I didn't know it yet, but that calm was fragile, like glass stretched too thin. And just beyond, the sunlight streaming in, the storm was quietly gathering. We piled into the car, the back seat already crowded with bags, jackets, and the unmistakable chaos of excited family members. The engine roared to life, and the soft vibrations beneath my hands made the day feel real. I took a deep breath and let the familiar rhythm of the road settle me. The scenery passed in a blur, trees, fields, and the occasional farmhouse, and I found myself drifting into memories. I remembered the first trip we ever took as a family, the laughter echoing off the hills, my grandpa humming a tune under his breath, while my daughter and I argued over which snacks to eat first. Those were simple days, uncomplicated. Days when the world felt like it could only hold warmth. But even as the road stretched ahead, I noticed the subtle tension in the car. My son-in-law tapped his fingers impatiently on the dashboard, his eyes flicking repeatedly to the GPS like he was waiting for something, or maybe someone, to fail. He kept making small, cutting remarks about everything: the route, the music, even my choice to stop for gas. I wanted to shrug it off, to chalk it up to his usual sarcasm, but the edge in his voice was sharper than before. My grandpa sat quietly beside me, eyes staring out the window. I could see the faint lines of worry etched into his face, the way his hands rested on his knees a little tighter than usual. I wanted to ask him what was wrong, but the words stuck in my throat. Sometimes, silence is louder than conversation, and today, it was deafening. I pulled the scarf tighter around my neck as the wind rattled against the window, and the scent of pine from the trees outside mixed with the faint smell of old leather. In the car, the ordinary sounds of the road, the tires humming against asphalt, the occasional honk, the distant rumble of a truck, felt amplified somehow. Almost tense, the memory floated uninvited into my mind. The last trip with Grandpa, just the two of us, when he had insisted I take the longer, scenic route, insisting I needed to see the river bend just right. I laughed then, thinking how stubborn he could be, but now the memory carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. That easygoing patience of his was a stark contrast to the tense quiet now filling the car. Maybe I'm just imagining things, I thought. staring at the shifting landscape. Maybe it's nothing, but my gut told me otherwise. It was the kind of feeling that clings to the back of your mind, whispering that something you didn't expect was about to happen. Something that would change the way you saw your family. Forever, the car rolled on, the hum of tires on asphalt blending with muffled chatter, occasional laughter, and the persistent prickle of unease. I tried to focus on the good, on my daughter singing along to a song, on Grandpa's quiet presence beside me, but that subtle edge of tension refused to be ignored. It was there, lurking, quietly waiting for the first crack in the calm to appear, and I didn't know it yet, but that small, uneasy feeling would grow, until the world we thought we knew would feel like it had turned upside down. The car finally rolled up the winding driveway, tires crunching over gravel, and I felt that familiar mix of excitement and relief that always comes with arriving somewhere new. The cabin, or, in this case, the rental house, stood there, quiet and still, almost waiting for us to fill it with our chaos. I could smell the pine in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of damp earth after the night's rain. Grandpa moved. Slowly, Kane tapping lightly on the walkway, his steps deliberate. I noticed how carefully he navigated each small stone, almost as if he was testing the ground for some hidden danger. It made my chest tighten. He wasn't frail, but there was a vulnerability in him today that I hadn't seen before. As we entered, everyone began settling in. Bags were shuffled into corners, shoes kicked off, and laughter started to echo again. But there was an undercurrent, a subtle sharpness, like a guitar string just out of tune. My son-in-law, in particular, seemed off. He made a small, casual remark about the layout of the house, something about the family tree, or jokingly questioning who even owned this place. I forced a laugh, but my stomach sank that I could feel Grandpa stiffen beside me. His eyes darted toward my son-in-law, a flicker of confusion or maybe hurt passing across his face. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, that this was just playful, teasing, but something about the tone, it wasn't right. The house itself felt alive in a way that made me uneasy. The echo of footsteps in the hallway, the faint creak of the stairs, even the wind rattling a loose window pane, it all felt amplified, almost accusatory. Every small sound made me flinch slightly, like the world itself was aware that the balance of this trip was fragile, that I found myself replaying the last trip in my head. Grandpa had been at the center of every joke, every story, his laugh filling the room as we teased him about his stubbornness or his old-fashioned ways. That warmth felt distant now, replaced by a quiet tension I couldn't shake. I caught my daughter glancing nervously at her husband, her lips pressed tight together. The playful atmosphere I had expected was slipping through my fingers, replaced by a cold undercurrent that I tried to focus on something small and grounding. The smell of the fireplace, still faintly smoky from a previous use, or the soft sunlight filtering through the curtains. But even those comforts couldn't fully mask the prickling feeling crawling up my spine. Something was building. Something I couldn't yet name, and I knew it wouldn't stay hidden for long. That subtle tension, that quiet discord, was the first sign that this trip wouldn't be like the ones before. The calm we had carried from the morning had shifted, and the cracks were beginning to show. And though I didn't know exactly what was coming, deep down, I already feared the storm that was quietly approaching. That we were all gathered in the living room, trying to settle in. Grandpa had taken his usual spot in the corner chair, Kane resting against the arm, eyes calm but wary. I was leaning against the doorway, watching, hoping the tension from earlier would simply fade into the background. But then it happened. My son-in-law, in that same sharp, impatient tone I'd noticed all morning, snapped something I'll never forget. "He's not your real grandpa." The words hit me like a punch to the chest. I could feel my heart stutter, my breath catching somewhere deep in my throat. The room went quiet, the kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that presses against your ears and makes your bones ache. Time slowed. I saw the disbelief on everyone's faces, but none of it compared to what I saw in Grandpa. He froze, eyes wide, his lips barely moving. His hands trembled slightly as they rested on his knees. I wanted to reach out, to put my hand on his shoulder, but I felt rooted to the spot, unable to breathe, unable to think. My mind spun, trying to process what I had just heard. No one says that about someone you've loved your whole life. No one. A flashback hit me like lightning. I saw Grandpa teaching me to ride my bike, his hand steady on my back, telling me I could do it, even when I was terrified. I saw him laughing at Christmas mornings, his voice deep and warm, the smell of pine and cinnamon filling the room. I saw his hands, weathered and strong, guiding me through life's little victories and failures alike. And then I looked back at him now, trembling, and it felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me, that I could feel my own hands clench at my sides, nails digging into my palms. Rage bubbled up, sharp and raw, but it was tangled with disbelief, grief, and a profound sorrow. How could someone be so cruel? How could someone strip away decades of love, trust, and shared memories with a single, careless sentence? Grandpa finally spoke, his voice low, shaking, but steady in its dignity. I've been your grandpa in every way that matters. That's enough. The room remained tense. I noticed my daughter covering her mouth, her eyes glossy, while others exchanged uncertain glances, unsure how to respond. But all I could see was the man who had raised me, the one who had given me so much love, reduced to silence in the face of someone else's thoughtless words. Visually, it was like the world had paused. Close-ups on Grandpa's face, trembling, hands, the quiver in his lips. The sunlight filtering through the curtains seemed harsher now, spotlighting the pain in the room. Every small detail, the ticking of the clock, the rustle of clothing, the quiet shuffle of feet, was amplified, echoing in the emptiness left by that single cruel phrase. And in that moment, I realized that nothing would ever feel the same again. The storm we had been ignoring was no longer gathering quietly. It had arrived, roaring into our lives in a way none of us could ignore. The room erupted, not with laughter, not with playful teasing, but with stunned silence that felt heavier than any shout. My chest was tight, my stomach twisting, and I felt a rush of heat that had nothing to do with the sunlight streaming through the windows. I wanted to scream, to demand that the words be taken back, but my voice felt trapped somewhere deep in my throat. Grandpa sank slightly in his chair, as if the weight of that cruel declaration had physically pushed him down. His eyes were glassy, but his pride kept them steady, a silent wall against the storm of disrespect. I could feel every nerve in my body tense. I wanted to shield him from this, to step in and tear into the person who had dared to strip him of decades of love with a single sentence. That I could see my daughter frozen, her hand pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide and uncertain. I knew she wanted to step in, wanted to defend her grandfather, but the words seemed to hang in the air, sticky and suffocating, making it impossible for anyone to act immediately. I swallowed hard and took a step forward. "Enough," I said, voice shaking but firm. "That's not how we talk about family." The words sounded feeble, even to me, but they were all I could manage. The son-in-law looked at me, eyes narrowing, his mouth twitching like he was ready to retort. But the anger I felt, the raw, protective fury, made it impossible for me to let him speak. I could feel my hands trembling, nails pressing into my palms, but the surge of adrenaline kept me standing, rooted, fighting against the chaos he'd unleashed. Flashbacks came unbidden. Grandpa patiently teaching me to tie my shoes, guiding me through homework late into the night, staying up during storms when I was scared of thunder. Those hands that had held me, steadied me, lifted me when I was faltering. They deserved respect. Not this. Not the humiliation of having someone question decades of love with such venom. The house itself seemed to echo with tension. The subtle creaks of the floorboards, the faint hum of the refrigerator, even the ticking of the clock in the corner. It all felt exaggerated, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I could see the smaller details. Grandpa's hand shaking slightly as it rested on the arm of the chair, a loose thread on the carpet catching the sunlight, my daughter's foot tapping nervously against the floor. That I realized, in that suffocating moment, that protection wasn't just about standing up for someone. It was about holding the emotional space for them, letting them know that despite the cruelty in the world, they were not alone. I took a deep breath and moved closer to Grandpa, letting him know without words that I was there, that he mattered, that his love and presence were undeniable. Even amid the chaos, the anger, and the betrayal, a stubborn clarity emerged. Family wasn't defined by bloodlines or technicalities. It was about loyalty, love, and standing for each other when the world, or someone in it, tried to diminish what mattered most. And in that realization, I felt a spark of strength, a glimmer of hope that even after this, we could endure. But it would take every ounce of patience, every drop of courage, to weather what had just begun. After the initial shock, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving a hollow ache in its wake. Grandpa had retreated slightly into himself, his shoulders slumping, his hands gripping the arms of his chair as if to hold himself together. The hurt in his eyes was raw and unspoken, and I could feel it cutting through me like a cold wind that I sank into the nearest couch, head in my hands, trying to make sense of what had just happened. I could still hear the echo of that cruel sentence, ringing in the room, bouncing off the walls, embedding itself in every corner of the house. He's not your real grandpa. The words weren't just cruel, they were corrosive. They stripped away decades of shared memories, laughter, and love, leaving only this unbearable emptiness. My daughter sat beside me, her hand brushing mine in a small, desperate gesture of comfort. I wanted to cry, to scream, to throw something. But instead, all I could do was feel the weight of betrayal, the sting of disbelief, the grief of watching someone I loved so deeply humiliated before my eyes. Grandpa remained quiet, but the subtle signs of his pain were everywhere. The slight tremor in his hands, the tight line of his mouth, the distant look in his eyes, it was all there. I wanted to reach out, to pull him into a hug, to tell him he was enough, that we loved him, that nothing in the world could erase the decades he had given to this family. But I didn't know if words were enough. That I remembered the times he had comforted me in my own moments of failure, patching up scraped knees, listening patiently as I fumbled through my mistakes, telling me that it was okay to be imperfect. And now, here he was, on the receiving end of a cruelty so senseless, so callous, that I felt both powerless and enraged. The helplessness was suffocating. The house felt oppressively quiet. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside, magnified in the weight of the moment. Half-eaten snacks sat abandoned on the table, the sunlight that had once felt warm now glaringly bright against the tension in the room. Even the air seemed thick, heavy with the residue of conflict. I glanced at my daughter again, and I could see her heart breaking too. This wasn't just Grandpa's pain. It was a ripple that spread through all of us. And I realized, painfully, that some wounds weren't quick to heal, and some words weren't easily forgotten. That I closed my eyes and took a shaky breath, letting the grief wash over me. It was raw, unfiltered, and relentless. For the first time that day, I allowed myself to feel the full weight of heartbreak, not just for Grandpa, but for the fractured sense of family that I had clung to for so long. And in that quiet collapse, I understood that healing wouldn't come quickly. But acknowledging the pain, letting it settle into me, was the first step. Even in the heartbreak, there was a strange, fragile clarity. We would need each other to get through this. Grandpa and I, together, holding the remnants of love that no one could take away. Later that evening, after the storm of emotions had quieted just enough to allow thinking, I found myself standing in the hallway, my hands clenched at my sides. The rest of the family was scattered, some in the kitchen, some lingering in the living room. But I needed a moment, a private space to face him. I took a deep breath and followed the subtle sounds of movement to where my son-in-law had retreated, a phone in his hand and a look of smug detachment on his face. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the creak of the floorboards were the only witnesses. I swallowed hard, trying to steady the sudden tremor in my hands. "Can we talk?" I asked, voice calm but carrying an edge that made him glance up quickly. He looked at me, brow raised, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of surprise. Or maybe he was just calculating how to defend himself. I could feel my heartbeat pounding in my ears, my throat tight, and yet I forced myself to stay steady. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about clarity, about making him see the damage his words had done. "You don't get to say things like that," I said, low and measured. "Not about him, not about this family. What you said, there are no words for how wrong it was." He opened his mouth, but I held up a hand, needing to keep the floor. "Listen, I'm not here to yell, and I'm not here to fight. I'm here because you need to understand something. He's been our family in every way that counts. The bond we have, the years we've shared, that isn't up for debate." I paused, letting the words settle, and in the quiet of the hallway, I remembered myself as a child, standing up for someone bullied, trembling but determined. That same trembling determination was here now, coursing through me. The fear of confrontation hadn't gone away, but courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was moving forward despite it. He stared at me, silence stretching out, thick and uncomfortable. I could see the shift in his posture, the way he lowered his phone, the way his jaw tightened. And for the first time that day, I felt a small spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to understand. The hallway felt narrower somehow, the shadows stretching across the walls. The faint rustle of clothing and the distant chatter of the others seemed miles away. All that existed was the raw, tense space between us, heavy with words unsaid, lessons to be learned, and the weight of years of love and respect. I want you to see him, I added softly, almost pleading. Not just as someone with a title, but as the man who raised generations, who taught us what family really means. That's not something you erase with a sentence. For a long moment, there was nothing but silence, and then he shifted, almost imperceptibly, as if absorbing the weight of what I had said. It wasn't a full apology, far from it, but it was the first crack in the wall of indifference he had built. And in that hallway, standing face to face, I realized that confrontation wasn't about proving who was right or wrong. It was about holding the space for truth, for love, for the integrity of what truly mattered. Grandpa deserved that. We all did. Later that night, after the confrontation had left the hallway quiet and heavy, I found myself sitting across from Grandpa by the fire. The flames flickered softly, casting shadows that danced on the walls and highlighted the deep lines of his face. His eyes, tired but steady, met mine with a calm I couldn't yet understand. He didn't need to speak at first. The crackle of the fire, the faint whistle of wind outside, and the smell of burning wood filled the room in a way that made words almost unnecessary. I just sat there, listening, letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but firm. You know, family isn't just about blood. It's about the bonds we choose to honor, the love we show, and the patience we carry for each other. I wanted to argue, to tell him I'd seen the hurt, that no words could justify the cruelty we'd faced. But as I looked at him, I realized he was teaching something far greater than any argument could convey. He was showing me that strength isn't loud or reactive. It's quiet, enduring, and unwavering. I've lived long enough to see people come and go, to see words wound deeper than knives. But I've also learned that love, patience, and forgiveness are stronger than any insult. He continued, voice steady as the firelight reflected in his eyes. It doesn't mean you accept cruelty. It means you understand what truly matters. And you hold on to that, no matter what. I felt a lump in my throat, a mix of awe and guilt. I had been so consumed by anger and the desire to defend him that I hadn't paused to absorb the lessons he'd already lived. He was showing me the path forward, not with loud words, but with quiet dignity. The faint smell of smoke, the warmth of the fire, and the soft ticking of the clock created a cocoon of reflection. I noticed the small details, his hands resting calmly on his knees, the slight tilt of his head, the calm breath that came from decades of experience and resilience. It was humbling. Flashbacks surfaced unbidden. Grandpa guiding me through childhood fears, helping me navigate heartbreaks, and showing me, over and over, that patience and understanding often mattered more than immediate justice. Each memory now felt like a thread connecting the past to the present, tying me to a deeper understanding of what it meant to be family. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of his words sink in. In that quiet living room, surrounded by the crackling warmth of the fire, I realized that healing didn't require revenge or even complete understanding from everyone. It required holding space for love, for wisdom, and for the bonds that could not be broken. And in that space, I finally felt a glimmer of peace. A quiet, fragile peace, yes, but peace nonetheless. Grandpa had endured far more than any insult, and he had taught me that endurance, patience, and love were the real markers of strength. The next morning, the air felt lighter, though still tinged with the remnants of yesterday's storm. The tension hadn't vanished completely, but small gestures began to stitch the pieces of our family back together. It started quietly, my daughter handing Grandpa his morning coffee, the careful way he smiled back, a faint spark of the warmth we'd almost lost that I watched as my son-in-law approached the table cautiously, a hesitant attempt at normalcy in his movements. He didn't speak right away, but I could see the subtle shift in his demeanor, the way he glanced at Grandpa, almost as if measuring the depth of his own words before trying to make amends. It was awkward, clumsy even, but it was an effort. And in that, there was hope. The smell of breakfast filled the kitchen, sizzling bacon, toast browning slowly, the faint aroma of brewed coffee lingering like a soft promise. Grandpa laughed softly at a small joke my daughter made, the kind of easy laugh that had always made the house feel alive. I felt a small relief, a flicker of reassurance that despite the pain, the core of our family hadn't been destroyed. We spent the morning in small, deliberate acts of reconnection, folding laundry together, clearing the table, even helping Grandpa steady himself as he moved around the cabin. Every interaction was tiny, almost imperceptible, but they carried weight. Hands passing plates, shared smiles, laughter bubbling up unexpectedly. These were the threads repairing the fabric that had been strained. Flashbacks drifted through my mind. The past family trips, the messy board games, the long hikes, the car rides filled with laughter and songs. Memories I had taken for granted now felt precious, fragile reminders of what could survive even the harshest moments. I realized that healing didn't demand perfection. It demanded presence, attention, and a willingness to forgive small missteps while holding fast to what mattered. That I caught Grandpa's eye across the room, and he gave me that small, knowing nod, the one that said he understood I was holding space for him, protecting him, and valuing the love that had always been unwavering. My chest swelled with gratitude for the resilience he carried, the quiet strength that had guided us all. Even my son-in-law attempted a soft smile, a tentative effort to bridge the gap his words had torn open. It wasn't complete forgiveness, perhaps. It never would be. But it was an acknowledgement that we were trying, together, to rebuild something stronger than anger or resentment. Outside, sunlight poured through the windows, warming the cabin and highlighting the dust motes that danced lazily in the beams. There was a kind of beauty in these small, imperfect moments. Laughter that came despite awkwardness, glances exchanged across the table, the comfort of simply being together, and I realized that family didn't require everyone to be perfect or to always get it right. It required effort, presence, and a willingness to return, day after day, to the people who mattered most. In that morning light, surrounded by small, deliberate acts of care, I felt a fragile, budding hope that even after the harshest storms, love could endure. The trip had come to its inevitable end. Bags were packed, shoes tied, and the cabin that had held both conflict and healing was slowly returning to silence. I stood at the doorway, taking in the scene one last time. The remnants of breakfast still on the counter, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air, sunlight streaming through the windows and dust motes catching the light like tiny sparks. Grandpa shuffled toward the car slowly, cane tapping against the gravel, and I walked beside him, careful not to rush, careful to let him set the pace. His presence was steady, quiet, and I found myself grateful for every moment I could spend near him, for every lesson he had quietly imparted in his own enduring way. The car engine hummed to life, tires crunching over the gravel, carrying us away from the cabin and toward our separate routines. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Grandpa waving from the porch, his smile faint but real, the kind of smile that carries wisdom, patience, and a quiet pride that no words could diminish. Flashbacks of past trips flickered through my mind. Christmas mornings, long hikes, car rides filled with laughter and music, moments when the world felt simpler, warmer. Those memories, once easy to take for granted, now felt sacred, a reminder of what truly mattered, the love that had endured despite mistakes, cruelty, and misunderstandings. That I thought about the confrontation, the heartbreak, and the small victories of reconciliation. I realized that family wasn't about perfection or even always understanding each other. It was about showing up, standing together, and holding space for one another, even when words cut deep or intentions were flawed. It was about love that didn't waver, even when tested. My daughter leaned against the door, tired but smiling, and I caught my son-in-law's awkward attempt at a nod of acknowledgement. It wasn't complete forgiveness. Perhaps it never would be, but it was a recognition of effort, a step toward rebuilding trust. And I understood that sometimes that was enough. As we drove away, the cabin shrinking in the distance, I exhaled. Slowly. There was a bittersweet weight to leaving, grief for the moments lost, tension still lingering in the air, but also a sense of closure. The storm had passed, and while scars remained, so did resilience, love, and a deeper appreciation for the bonds that truly mattered. That I realized, quietly, that I would remember this trip forever, not just for the pain, but for the lessons it carried, for the strength of my grandpa, the subtle signs of growth in others, and the understanding that family, at its core, is defined not by blood or titles, but by the love and care we choose to nurture. And in that quiet reflection, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, I felt a fragile, enduring peace. The kind of peace that comes from witnessing resilience, embracing love, and understanding that even in our most human, flawed moments, there is still room for connection, forgiveness, and hope.